Okay, so today I wanted to talk about album cohesion. How important is that for you? It is going to affect the experience of listening to an album and albums that you think are cohesive and are not cohesive. So first up, for an album that's not cohesive, even Taylor Swift herself has said this. She said that Red isn't cohesive, and I would definitely agree with that. I think that the track list definitely could have been better sequenced for this album, and I'm using the original version because it was originally released in 2012. Though I really do like Red Taylor's version, but just for this video. And so, kind of my thoughts on Red as an album. I think that it's one of her best albums for sure. Has some of my favorite songs, like Begin Again is probably my favorite Taylor Swift song. Treacherous was a great moment on this album. State of Grace is definitely one of her best opening tracks for sure. And so there's even stuff like Holy Ground and The Lucky One, for example. So I think that there's actually a lot to like about this album, but I think it could have been better in terms of the sequencing for sure. And I also think that she could have whittled down the tracks a little bit more because stuff like Stay, Stay, Stay isn't personally a favorite. So this is an album I would say is not cohesive, but it doesn't really take away from the album much. Next album, 1989, which she came up with after she lost Album of the Year at the Grammys for Red. She wanted to make this 80s synth pop album and she wanted it to be cohesive, and I feel like she did a really good job with that. And I feel like it's pretty well thought out, and I think she just was able to really have a lot of strong songs on this album, like 6 singles off of this album, having great stuff like Blank Space, Out of the Woods, and you even have some other cool stuff like I Know Places and Clean. I think is one of her best closing tracks. So I think that she did a lot better about being cohesive in this cohesive album I mention all the time. Beyonce Renaissance, everything is just in a really great order in this album specifically. And then of course the transitions are amazing. So I love this album, my favorite album of that year. Janet Jackson, Rhythm Nation 1814. Yeah, I really like the interludes in between, and this just is about, social issues and stuff, and the way that she was able to do that, and then have it with her songs and the transitions in between that, and still have it be a good train of thoughts where you can follow it and understand what she's talking about. That's what I really liked. And she is really able to give you pop hits and also be socially conscious at the same time. Last cohesive one I liked was Mariah Carey Butterfly. I just think that this is a really nice way to listen to an album. I think it flows quite well, so that's the last one. Yes, it can bother me if I feel like the order of an album is just not right, like if I wanted to switch a track around or two, but at the same time, it's like that's what I have a playlist for, so it can only bother me to a certain extent. I'm a lot more annoyed if I only like the first half of the song and then the second half of the song I don't like, and then I have to go skip it, and that's what I do sometimes for songs. So as long as the songs are good, it doesn't typically matter a whole lot to me what order that they're in. And so I think pacing of an album is definitely an important thing, right? Like I don't want to have like five up tempos and then a ballad and like all those things. So artists have to be very strategic about that. Because sometimes I just listen to one song and I'm like, why is this a song afterwards? Like it kind of just feels like a setup for all the momentum that we built off of the songs. I think in terms of album cohesion is that some people feel whenever we say we want an album to be cohesive, we want all the songs to sound the same, and that's not what the goal is. The goal is to make sure that the songs and the track list makes sense next to each other, and that you're going on a journey listening to the album and everything is in its right place, because you don't want to up tempo in the wrong place. Like why would you have a super depressing song and then an up tempo after that? Sometimes it can work, but sometimes it's nice to have something to kind of like ease that transition, and then you have the up tempo. Like it's very strategic. A lot of times I notice I like whenever albums are started off with a great opening track, something that has a lot of energy, gets you stuck into it, and then we can kind of go from there. Like, for example, on Mariah Carey's Butterfly album, we start off with Honey. And so this isn't as much of a up-tempo as like her other stuff. Like, think about a Fantasy Heartbreaker. Like, those are a little bit faster and like the BPM and stuff like that. But Honey is still a really good up-tempo. I still really like it. And then she has her ballad on here, Butterfly, which is one of my favorite songs by her. Then we go into another ballad, My All. And then it's The Roof, Back in Time, and then it's 4th of July. So just the way that those songs go next to each other, I appreciate it for the most part, and the sequencing on the album I think is really good. So that's what I mean in terms of good sequencing and stuff. And I think it also just depends on the songs on the album and stuff. Because if you just were to like glance at the track list, you might think, oh, this doesn't work. But if you actually listen to the album, you're like, oh, this sounds really good. So it's just interesting to hear about the track listing and sequencing from artists and stuff, because you can tell that they put so much effort into it. And so it's just really interesting to hear, like, oh, I put this song here because of this reason, I put this song here because of that reason. An example I just thought of, and it's interesting for Beyonce. So, B Day, I said one of my favorite sophomore albums for sure. And I like the sequencing of the standard version of it a lot for the most part, though I feel like Resentment kind of is out of place because there's a lot of up tempos on this album and it just kind of sticks out. I feel like she gets away with Irreplaceable because it's kind of a mid tempo and I think that it works, but Resentment, I didn't really need it on the album, but for the most part, I think the sequencing on the album is flawless. Like it's up tempo after up tempo after up tempo, and even stuff that's more mid tempo, like it just works. Like Kitty Cat finds a way to work on this album, and so does Irreplaceable. But whenever she did the deluxe version, this is what bothers me right here. Because it was like you completely restructured the album. Like you threw all the deluxe tracks like on top really, and then also kind of had them sequenced in the track list. So I don't like the new track listing of this, honestly. Like I would have just preferred if she would have threw all the bonus tracks at the end. And then Check on It is not even on this version of the album, and I don't know what the deal is with that. And then with 4, it's different because it starts off with 1+1 of the standard version, and then on the expanded version she switched that with Love on Top, and I actually like the new order of it on the deluxe, so I will say that. I think sometimes it depends on what version of an album you get accustomed to. Like if you're gonna do a deluxe, 9 times out of 10 just add the extra tracks at the end. I already got used to the original order, and if you just resequence it like that, it's going to throw me off as well. So I do want to have that part, and it depends on the album and stuff like that, as I was saying. Also, I want to talk about is interludes. So for Janet's self-titled album, she has a lot of interludes, and a lot of the times I just don't feel like they help because like it's like a 4-second track, and it's like why couldn't you have added it to the last song, and having it be its own separate thing is kind of annoying, and I just feel like a lot of them don't really work in the context of the album. I do feel like this album's too long, so that's one of the examples of interludes. An example of an album recently that I feel like was cohesive and wasn't at the same time as Billy's new album. I have a reaction to it on my YouTube channel, Anastasia25, if you want to see like my overall thoughts on each song. But I liked how it was like acoustic, but then whenever they started doing all like the electronic stuff and then like all that on the back half of the songs, it kind of threw off the album's cohesion in my opinion, and I didn't really care for it. So yeah, I kind of feeling two ways about this album in that kind of sense, and that was one of my issues with it, but it didn't completely ruin it. For Rodrigo Sour, I just felt like she had too many ballads on here and not enough up tempos, and I feel like with Guts she rectified that. My thoughts, I think that album cohesion is important. I think that it matters to a certain degree. Like I said, Red isn't cohesive, as Taylor has admitted, but I still do like the album for the most part. And I think 1989 was better with that. And I think 1989 was a better album, but I mean, that's just my opinion. And as long as the songs are good, that's really what matters to me. I think that the order of it is important because you don't want to have something that's too drawing to listen to. And I think you have to be very mindful of interludes and features and all those things. But I think it's important to be cohesive to a certain degree because it's like you want to have whatever larger message, if there is one, to be portrayed correctly throughout the album, or to just have a nice listening experience all the way through and not jolt the listener. So if an album isn't cohesive, it's not going to completely ruin the album for me. Is it going to alter my experience? Will I like it a little bit less? Probably, but it's not a deal breaker. I also think it depends on how incohesive that the album is and how many good songs on the album in general. But I think that there is a lot of food for thought with that.